This podcast is sponsored by Teens and Youth in Leadership, TYIL Africa, an organization that is committed to raising generations of young leaders across Africa. Our programs include leadership education, leadership fellowship, research training, webinars, and conferences. Stay informed of our programs by following us on LinkedIn at TYIL and at TYIL Africa on Instagram.
Hello, my name is Israel Idari. I am a social scientist and a pragmatist. As a social scientist, my research is focused on understanding how youth develop leadership to make social change within their communities and immediate environment. I'd like to invite you to this podcast where I interview and have conversations with scholars and practitioners on their perspective on leadership, followership, and social change. I hope you truly learn from this podcast. Have fun. Today I'm with Dr. Dami Alegbeleye, an assistant professor of leadership and organizational studies at the University of Southern Maine. How are you today, Dr. Dami?
Well, I'm doing very well.
Good to have you on this podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so today I want to talk about followership, a subject that you have researched on. Perhaps you talk about every day, and I know you're deeply passionate about. How did you get into the field of followership research and education?
So I got interested in the topic of followership through a class I had taken during my doctoral studies. As you know, I got my PhD from Virginia Tech, same as you. And one of the classes I took was a leadership theory class, and followership was one of the topics. In that class, we read a book by Barbara Kellyman titled The End of Leadership. The title piqued my interest. I was curious, like, who is this person that's trying to end leadership when I was just trying to get into leadership? Well, eventually I would read the book, and I realized that the title was more promotional than anything else. And she was just trying to advocate for followership. So in the book, she was saying that we've paid so much attention to leadership at the expense of followership, right? So that was my first big introduction, I would say, to followership. And afterward, the research piece came. I started to attend conferences. I started to publish conference proceedings on followership. And then I started to publish journal articles on followership. Interestingly, my dissertation topic was also on followership. So I explored leader-follower dynamics in student project teams. And today, as you know, I'm a leadership educator who is interested in followership.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. So, how important is followership or followership education to leadership development, particularly among youth and students?
So the importance of followership to leadership development cannot be overemphasized. And the reason is because followership can be viewed as the other side of the coin, right? In fact, there's this quote by Ross in 1990. He said something very profound about leadership. He says, leadership is what leaders and followers do. So when you think of leadership, people typically think of leaders. But in reality, leadership is what leaders and followers do. Now, the idea of followership is almost, if you will, reversing the lens. So because leadership scholars have focused solely on leaders, people like myself are now reversing the lens and trying to shine some light on followership. And the reason is because when you think of followership, you are also thinking of influence. All right. So people think of leadership. Well, leadership is influence in a leader role. Followership is influence in a follower role. Right. And if you think about I'm sure you're aware of the popular leadership followership models, right? Like Shayla's model of courageous followership, uh, Kelly's model of exemplary followership, and all these other followership. Most of these theories emphasize two core behaviors. One is constructive voice, the ability to speak up to leaders, and the other is active engagement. So these behaviors emphasize agency, all right? They also emphasize critical thinking skills. Speaking up requires some sort of critical thinking. You have to know what you want to speak up about before you speak up about it, right? And also ethics is another big one. If you see something is going wrong in your organization or your leader is doing something wrong, you speak up because you have some sort of ethics. So all these traits, skills, if you will, agency, critical thinking, ethics, are also very important for leadership development, right? We want our leaders to be agentic. We want them to be critical thinkers. We want them to be ethical. So what I have found is that followership development is a precursor to leadership development.
Wow, thank you. So now, understanding that these are two sides of the same coin, how, as a leadership educator, have you balanced teaching leadership and followership?
I teach two courses here at the University of Southern Maine two leadership theory courses, one at the undergraduate level and the other at the graduate level. I'm a leadership educator, so when students take my classes, they are not there to learn about followership. They are there to learn about leadership. So it becomes interesting and a bit of an oxymoron when student comes to class and you're talking of being better followers, because that's not what they signed up for. However, in my case, I think when you present followership as complementary to leadership, then there's no conflict. So that's what I've done. I try to make students realize that followership does not preclude you from being effective leaders. In fact, it helps you become better leaders. And at first, on the first day of class, there's this opinion polls that I typically take. I just ask students, like, who here would like to take a course on followership? And in a class of, say, 15, you'd probably get between 0 to 2 students raise their hands up. And at the end of the course, the last day of class, I ask the same question. Who here would like to take a class on followership? And guess what? Almost everyone would raise up their hands because they get it eventually. So at first, they might not be receptive because they don't get it. There's all these negative connotations associated with followership. So nobody wants to be a follower. These guys have been told from when they were little, right? From childhood, that be a leader and not a follower, right? And as you know, followership is associated with a lack of imagination, passiveness, etc. So nobody wants to be that. So it's a wrong mindset about the concept. And our job as leadership educators who's interested in followership is to first enlighten students about what followership is and what it is not. Once you're able to do that, then everybody opens up to it. And the idea of followership, like I always say, is intuitively appealing. It makes sense, right? Everyone has been a follower at one point or the other. So it makes sense. It's just a problem of the language. And I think positioning followership as complementary to leadership does the magic.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing those points. I know you currently lecture in the United States. I also know that you're from Nigeria, and growing up in Nigeria, how would you explain the general perception about followership?
Good question. In Nigeria, I think people generally think of followership in the general way that even people here in the state think of followership, which is that followership is passive. That's the general idea. But I would say that that conception is even stronger in a country like Nigeria and in most African countries, and also even countries like most hierarchical cultures in general, where people believe that power should be stratified and, they have this conception that if I'm a follower, I have to be obedient. So people think that followership is synonymous with obedience and leadership is synonymous with authority. And so, growing up in Nigeria, we were taught to be very obsequious, very respectful, sometimes to a fault. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with respect. I'm big on respect. But at what point do we teach people that it's okay to speak up to power? Okay. When are you supposed to do that? And that's what followership is all about. And I think maybe that's partly responsible for why I'm interested in followership, because I saw this concept as one that can really revolutionize Nigeria and most African countries. Okay. If the citizens of African countries, the youths, the students, and everyone begin to speak up to authority, begin to intelligently disobey, like Sheila would call it, right? Then we would see transformational changes all across the board. So yeah, that's my take on that.
All right, I'm gonna ask you another question. So we
Mhm.
talk about leadership development, from childhood, and there is a study, I think by Vega Escobar, that leadership begins from childhood and through children's engagement in various activities. That's generally when children are growing up, they want to help, they want to engage in activities that would assist people in doing things. Do you think we can get to that state where we'll say, oh, followership can be developed from childhood?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think when it comes to followership development, it's more applicable or it makes more sense to develop it from childhood, I would say, than even leadership. And I'll tell you why. So, with leadership, you need some sort of leadership opportunities to really hone your leadership skills, right? Well, unlike leadership, followership opportunities is there, right? Most people are always or are mostly in follower roles, especially children, right? So children are followers of their parents. right? If you're younger, if let's say if you're like me, you're the last born in your family, you're followers of your older siblings, right? So you have that concrete experience of being a follower. But the point is, are you an effective follower or not? So that's the big thing in developing followership from that age. So you see all these children, all this, um, you know, all these children engaged in their churches. They're engaged sometimes in clubs, like they're adolescent and engaged in clubs and social organizations. And they have this perception that, well, if I'm not the leader, I'm not important, right? And as a result, they become very passive followers. So if we want to develop followership at that level, one of the things we need to do is to I like to refer to Cole's experiential learning model, right? According to Cole, there are 4 stages of experiential learning. And by experiential learning, I mean learning by doing, right? Which is the best way to learn followership. The best way to learn followership is learning by doing. They actually have to do followership to learn it. So, according to that model, the first phase is concrete experience. And like I said, children have these concrete experiences of being in follower roles. So that's taken care of. Now, the next phase is reflection, something Cope called reflective observation. So, yes, you have the experience, but you also need to reflect on your experiences in a follower role. And that's where we come in as leadership educators interested in followership. We need to make the young people to begin to reflect on their roles. When I was in a follower role, how did I behave? What was my action? What were my reactions to my leader? And the next phase, what Cope called abstract conceptualization, which is simply you're theorizing, right? Why did I behave the way I did? So you bring like followership theories, like Shailav's model of courageous followership, Kelly's model of exemplary followership, and begin to think, was I an implementer? Was I a resource type of follower? Was I courageous? Was I effective? And you begin to think. So that's abstract conceptualization. You're forming your theories regarding your behavior in a follower role. And then you would come to some conclusions. And after you've come to some conclusion, maybe you concluded that, well, I wasn't quite courageous in my role as a follower in my student club, at church, at home. When my dad asked me to do something and I knew that wasn't the right thing to do, I should have spoken up as a courageous follower, but I decided not to speak up because I was scared or I was afraid. So, according to Sheila's model of courageous followership, I was probably more of an implementer, and I needed to be courageous. So that is where I need to develop. That's the skill I need to develop. And so the big point here is, yes, followership can be developed from childhood. It should be developed from childhood, I'd say, because children are already engaged in followership. And the way to do that is to focus on reflection, right? As well as, conceptualizing, abstract conceptualization, and then experimenting. That's the last part. So Cope called it active experimentation. So after you might have found that, well, this is where I'm lacking and this is what I need to do, then you need to replicate the right behavior in a future role? So that's how I would respond to that question.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I know that, these, approaches that you've shared can also be adopted for, college level students. So if I want to develop a followership curriculum, what content areas do you believe that I should focus on?
Yeah. So the first would be followership theories. So I would say want to focus on followership theories and practice. And the idea of that is you want to expose students to what followership is and what it is not. Remember, I said followership is suffering from a problem of language, right? There are just a bunch of negative connotations associated with followership. So followership theory course would help change those. There's also other content areas like I could think of followership in groups and teams. How do you become an effective follower in a team settings, right? In my research, I've found that youth have a tendency to want to dominate in group settings, right? Especially youth that want to become leaders because they think of leadership as authority. So one of the ways they want to prove themselves in their group is to dominate and show that, yes, I'm a leader. So in some cases, when you have two or more people trying to dominate, that's a recipe for disaster. So there needs to be some sort of training or education on how to be an effective team player through followership. So a course on followership in groups and teams will be very important. Another one is followership in context. You asked me about Nigeria. What would followership look like in a hierarchical culture versus a democratic one, for example, right? And also followership and ethics. How is ethics different in followership than leadership? How would you enact ethics differently in followership, right? Like, we talk of intelligent disobedience. You're speaking up. How do you speak up in a follower role when you don't have the power? In a leader role, you have the power. So yeah, you have a courage. I'm a courageous leader. I can speak up. Well, how would that look in a follower role when you don't have the power? So those are some content areas that I think is totally worthy of exploration.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Dami. That's something that, I know I would have to pay thousands of dollars to get access to. By the way, I'm going to seize this opportunity to let you know that you're a consistent speaker at the TYIL Fellowship Program. And this year, just like you have shared, we probably would just, tweak your session from, citizenship behavior and followership to actual followership. So if you don't mind, I'm going to follow your recommendations.
Problem, no problem. Just make sure you pay me.
Anyways, thank you so much for your time. It's really been an insightful session with you.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Future of Leadership podcast today. If you are here to kindly share, subscribe, leave a review, and follow us across our social media platforms, including Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, all at TYIL. See you in the next episode.